So how often do you come to this beautiful restaurant that we're in right now?
As often as I can get both my children to come with me, so maybe once a month on a
Do
weekend.
they eat this way, your kids?
Sometimes they eat this way. I mean, they're very into healthy eating.
So yeah, I met your daughter. She was here with a friend of hers, and she also was did comedy at one point.
Yeah, she does a lot of improv at school and musical comedy, and so it was such a delight when she came home. She said that she met you and you were telling her all about the industry, and she really had a nice time talking to you.
Yeah,
So
because
she's
it's
never gonna be a comic again.
Ever.
Right?
That was it.
After
That was
that.
the last.
I think that
Now she wants to become a lawyer since she met you.
really.
So you should send him, huh?
Yeah. Well, when I go to jail, you can have her get me out of jail with a get out of jail free card. It's very interesting when you have kids. I have a kid who's also a comedian. How they want to do something, and do you push your daughters to do what they want, or do you find yourself, being more like a parent trying to tell them what to do?
Well, my father pushed me to become an accountant, and I remember how that made me feel. It made me feel very stuck, like there was only one way to be in the world. And then I became a lawyer, and now I do business consulting and spiritual teachings. But at the time, it's an upsetting thing when a parent makes you feel like there's only one way to be in the world. So I have really taken a step back. It's been a practice though, because when you're brought up, look for safety, look for security, but at some point in your life, you realize there's no such thing.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to really let them pursue their passions, because my belief is that, you need to be responsible in life, you need to work hard, but that passion and that meaning is really what's going to push anyone forward, and especially nowadays, because things need to change. The world is changing. So I hope that their creativity and their passions will lead them.
How do you think it's changed? How do you think the world's changing?
I think it's more chaotic. I think it's more competitive.
And let me stop for a second. Chaotic, I agree with you. But is it more chaotic because of the internet and more people are aware of stuff that we weren't aware of? Was this stuff going on 40 years ago and we just didn't know about it?
Well, I think there's always been problems in the world. There's always been wars. There's always been famines. But I think what's happening now is because of the internet, everything is speeding up so quickly. Mm-hmm. And I think it's actually creating more anxiety and more worry, and even just being on electronics all the time. So I think kids are more aware. When I was young, I didn't even read the newspaper. I used to go outside, I used to go out with my friends. My girls know everything what's going on in the world. Every time there's a shooting, they have drills at school. It's a different world where kids know everything that's going on, and their nervous systems, I don't think, are prepared for that. So we have to help them the best we can.
And how can we help them?
Well, for me, in my life, the thing that I've done for my children, the first thing is this philosophy of maybe. And what the idea is about maybe is that what happens, where a lot of anxiety comes from, it comes from our fear of the unknown. Because a lot of us believe if we don't know what's going to happen next, things are going to be bad or they're not going to work out. So what we do, especially as parents as well, is what we write stories. My child will go to this college and be okay. I'll have this amount of money in the bank when I retire. I'll have this job forever, because it makes us feel better. But then life happens. And so we're not prepared for us to lose the job. We're not prepared for us not to have the money. We're not prepared for our child not to do what we want them to do. So this fear of the unknown, it just makes us feel like we're doomed. And we can look at that even in the world when we hear there's a war, there's all these nuclear warheads. And with this idea of maybe is in the hope within the unknown, because the truth is, if you want your life to change, it has to happen in the unknown. So when you could flip a switch on that and see that uncertainty is the place where all things are possible,
And
your
it's
life starts to
interesting.
change.
Uncertainty, it's such a great statement. That's where all the possibilities are. But some people feel when there's uncertainty that they're playing without a net.
Right. Well, we're all playing without a net.
Yes,
That's the thing. That's
I
the
agree.
story we tell,
That's
right?
Interesting.
Yeah. So with this idea, what happened to me is that I was addicted to certainty. I was probably one of the most anxious people you'll ever meet in your life. I could have competed in the Olympics.
Your background, being
But-
an attorney and a tax bookkeeping and accounting, it's all about numbers, all about certainty, all about precision.
And that's probably why I went into business. Why my father pushed me, but also it was always very grounding, because numbers don't lie unless someone's stealing from the business.
Right, yeah.
But my fear of what would happen next would there be a terrorist attack? Would my kids be okay? Would I lose my job? And this went on, and I had terrible anxiety, and I didn't feel well. And that's when I changed my diet. I did all these things. But the minute something uncertain happened, I went out of my mind.
But is there room for certainty in this world, in your world of uncertainty?
There is none. There is none. There's only the moment. Like all I know right now is here I am sitting with the two of you. That's the only certainty that I know.
And I just wanted to tell you my experience with your children and you. I witnessed a conversation. Remember when we were talking about your podcast, and her children were encouraging her to do stuff she didn't do before. She said, your daughter said, "Oh, you definitely have to do videos. You have to invite guests." And it was really interesting how she taught them well, and they are comfortable with uncertainty now.
Well, they're baby thinkers. And the story that changed my life is there was a story, my Qigong teacher told me a story about a farmer, and he had a horse, and the horse ran away.
Yes,
a lot of people have heard
tell
the
the story. It's a great story.
So,
It really affected me too. This
yeah,
story.
it just shifted me. And it's a simple story. This farmer had a horse, and the horse ran away. And his neighbor comes by and says, "You have the worst luck." And this farmer says, "Maybe." But the next day, the horse comes back with 5 bears. And the neighbor comes by and says, "You have the best luck." And the farmer says, "Maybe." But the next day, the farmer's son is on the horse. He falls off and breaks his leg. And the neighbor comes by and says, "You have the worst luck." And the farmer says, "Maybe." But the next day, the army comes to take his son to war, and they can't take him because his leg is broken. And the neighbor comes by and says, "You have the best luck." And the farmer says, "Maybe." And in the Taoist tradition, it means things are neither good or bad. And probably because I live in the United States of America, for me, it was like, oh, if the horse leaves, he can come back. And this idea of maybe made me see all the time that I'm not doomed. No matter what I think, if I have breath, I have hope. And if I have hope, I have maybe. And it's very simple. Maybe things will get better. Maybe they'll be okay. It's just this thing. It's a little word, but it always unhooks you, reminds you that even if you're suffering, because we all have suffering in our lives, we're not stuck. And so it's simple, but when you start to think more about maybe, you're more present, you're less stressed, and you're less worried, and you're more creative because you're not worried about what's going to happen next, because you know that with hard work, determination, passion, meaning, life's going to keep unfolding, and you will unfold with it.
And, I'm sure, as a parent, you're raising your kids and you want to give them an education and tell them the stuff what have you learned from your kids that have helped you in life?
Right. Well, the thing about kids that are tricky is that once you have a child, you're going to suffer on some level. Because like the Buddha said, right, all suffering, attachment leads to suffering. So we're all attached to our children.
Right.
But it's our fear of uncertainty that really is what makes it really hard. So yes, there's attachment, they're going to be okay, but if you're okay with the unknown, you're a little lighter with them. So they've been the biggest teacher for me about uncertainty. It's funny, I thought it was going to be my job, my anxiety. No, it's them. Because you can't control them, but they're like your arm, right?
Yeah.
And so you have something out in the world that's yours that you can't control. So maybe as they've shown me that uncertainty is filled with possibilities, because I've seen them suffer, I've seen them achieve, and I see how it just keeps moving. And we have to believe in them, but with this idea of maybe, we lighten the load. So we're attached, but when we don't fear the unknown, we could parent with less stress and anxiety.
Yeah, do you find that with your kids? You out there, working hard in the world, do you find that?
I was just thinking about it yesterday that it was very hard for my father to engage me in anything he was doing. Very hard. It was almost two stubborn people who never get along. Okay, and in fact, we were still very similar, and I definitely, as I can see now, have entrepreneurial tendencies that I definitely got from him. But he would never let me, I would never admit that I want to work with him, right? And now I'm lucky I'm working with my youngest daughter. And I told you how difficult it is for me to work with her because we clash and stuff. But yesterday I was thinking how happy and how lucky I am that I finally worked with her, and my father never had this chance. So, and now she's talking to me about veganism and how she's promoting it to her friends. I was like, whoa, and I never really told her to do this. I just brought her in, she enjoyed it. But my father was always enforcing it on me, and I pushed him away so long and so hard. So
there's a great book called The Four Agreements, and part of that book, The Four Agreements, it shows how my mom had a dream for me, and I have a dream for me, but I have to live my dream and respect my mother's dream, but at the same time, I have to live for myself. And my father and I didn't get along growing up, and he wanted me to do what he was doing, that kind of thing. And I have the skills that he put in me, but he eventually became my friend and fan. because I decided to live the life that I wanted to live and take the chances that I wanted to take.
And it takes a lot of strength to do that. And your parents loved you. They were just afraid. They were afraid of the unknown. If my child doesn't do this, how will they be successful? And that's the world is made that way. We all think that we know what we need to do, what's going to come next. And when we realize we don't know, we could get more in touch with our true selves, which you obviously did because you pursued.
I pursued and stayed. Now, you originally wanted to go into law, and you had some, hurdles at the beginning of it. And what pushed you ahead in that scenario? Because eventually you left that, but at the
It was
beginning,
my fear of the unknown. It was my anxiety. What I thought is I thought one day I would figure it out, I would gain certainty, and my life would be great. But literally, so my first day at this large law firm working, I was like, I've arrived. Things are great. That was the dream. The dream was when I got it, I would marry this great guy, I would get this great job, and I would be set. And the second day of work, my office mate comes in and says, hey, did you hear they're firing half the first years? And I was the first year. And it's funny, I didn't get fired. A lot of other people did, but
Right.
for some reason that moment, I think because I was betting on it, that's what we do, we bet on that one moment, I unraveled. And I was never able to catch myself again until I found this idea of maybe. I knew there was no certainty, and it drove me crazy. And so I kept changing the outside, hoping that one day I would gain it back. So I left the law firm, I started my own law practice, I became a business consultant. I kept thinking, I'm going to find that. And when you realize there is no certainty, but it doesn't mean that life's not beautiful, and it doesn't mean that you can't find new things in your life. It was that search for certainty that led me on my path. If you would have told me 27 years ago I would be doing work in the spiritual arena or business coaching, I wouldn't have believed you. But it was my pain that drove me to this.
And in the maybe that I read, where you picture this door, and then you pull back, and instead of having the microscope, you pull back and you show a bigger picture. Can you explain that?
Well, the thing is that you could sit and talk to someone about this idea of maybe, and they're like, well, no, this is how my life is, and this is really what I need to do. And one day I was watching this silly movie with my kids, this Madagascar or something.
Oh, yeah.
And there was this it's funny how sometimes you're watching, like a cartoon, and you'll have this realization. And in the scene, I don't even remember the movie, they threw the lion out of the jungle, and then there was a door. And the lion's banging on the door. There's an entire jungle that he could enter. He could enter on the right, the left. There's like acres and probably miles and miles. But he's just banging on the door, and that's what we do. We can't see there's something else. We're so sure this was our only way. This didn't work out, I'm doomed. This didn't work out, life will never get better. But when we pull away, the visualization is beautiful, because when you pull away, you realize there's nothing around the door. And that's the spaciousness of life. It's like you could look at a sky and say, there's a bird in the sky, or there's a sky with a bird in it. It's just a different way to look at life. And maybe it's expansive. And it makes you pull away and say, I'm in fear. I might not know what's going to happen next, but I do know life has maybe, and there are other possibilities other than the one thing I fear.
When did that hit you? What was the realization, this maybe thing, and you went, ding?
When I heard the story. Because when I heard the story of the farmer, I was already on my own. I didn't have enough clients. I wasn't making enough money. I had all these stories. And when I said maybe, I felt like this little relief all the time. And like my stress went away, my worry went away. But what's interesting too is when you're not worried about the future, you're present in the moment. And that's when you're most creative and expansive. So the more I was in maybe, the more I was getting clients. The more I was in maybe, the more creative, beautiful things would happen. So I started to see that it was my narrative about the future that was killing me. And this one little word would just, and again, it's not like we're not going to suffer. We all suffer in life. I think it was Viktor Frankl who gave this example of how suffering is like gas. And when it enters a chamber, it enters it evenly. It doesn't matter if it's a small chamber or a big chamber, which means that when something happens in our lives, it doesn't matter if it's small or large, we're going to suffer. So maybe it's just one of those things that opens the window for me, that makes me realize I'm in pain. We're going to feel pain, right? There's going to be upsets, but it reminds me this is not forever. And life has hope. To your last breath, there's hope and there's possibility. And that's what it does.
So now you're at this law firm, and half of your
first class is gone.
Yeah, they're gone. But you're still there. But you want to do it. You decide to do your own law firm.
Right, because I thought that would save me. Because what happens is we start to blame the outside world for our problems. I'm stressed because this law firm is bad. I'm stressed because I don't like my boss. We start to write these stories so I kept changing things, thinking, I'm gonna make it right. But all of a sudden, I'm in my apartment practicing law, more stressed than I was when I was at the law firm. So that was, every time I changed my life, I saw that this is not an outside game; it's an inner game. But I find that it's always an internal game, no matter what's happening. I remember actually the day I got my book agent. I thought it was going to be the best day of my life. Think about it, you write this book, you're getting rejected. It was the worst day of my life. I remember getting the agent. She said, okay, I'm going to pick you up. And all of a sudden, I was in turmoil. How will I do this? How will I make this work? How will I be successful? How will I sell books? And all of a sudden, I was in hell again. So for me, it's always internal. It's always when I'm in maybe, when I'm grateful. I think gratitude for the living in the blessings, but also being present. Presence for me is when I could put down my stress and worry and be present. I'm happy, no matter what's happening.
Because the world's full of anxiety, as you say, and it's probably more anxious than ever these days.
Well, I left my job at the law firm, and I was so anxious. And I ran into somebody, and I used to do legal services for them in exchange for classes. And that's how it happened. And when you exchange things, people are.
Yeah, I think that's the best way in life, is to exchange ideas. And you were saying something earlier about the book industry has changed. How has that changed?
Well, I think it used to be that you wrote a book, and if you had enough of a platform, you would get published. And there weren't all these different ways that people could find information to get things that are free. So I think it's more challenging now to get a book deal. It's more challenging to get people's attention. But on the flip side, people now have the freedom to express themselves. You can't stop somebody from publishing a book, even if you self-publish. So yes, for more established authors, it's more difficult. But for everyone on a whole, it's great, because you can get a book out there if you really want to, even if you self-publish.
And for people who are in that place, tell them how they can get stuff out there. Because a lot of people are sitting at home going, I have all these ideas, but what do I do with them?
Yeah. Well, I can just tell you my own experience, that even though I got that wonderful book agent that stressed me out, my book was rejected. In the book, I say 25 times, but I counted, it was 45 times. And I remember sitting there and I have this book that I've written to help people, and I'm sitting here and the world is telling me I can't do it. So I decided to self-publish. Yeah, and you just figure it out. I went to Amazon, I got the book out there, and then I found these different places that would advertise it, and then I gave it away for free for 3 days. It went on the bestseller list, and then Penguin Random House came in and they purchased the book. And so we re-edited it and we changed it a little bit, and that's really how it happened. Before, the only difficulty, though, is that when you're self-published, it's hard sometimes to get interviews. So you really have to be creative, because once Penguin picked me up, that's when I started writing for Psychology Today and all those other places. But perseverance, and also if it's meaningful to you, that's the most important thing. Because if it's not truly meaningful, you're going to give up. But if it's something that you believe is important, that the world needs to hear about, you just keep going. And eventually, something, if you change 100 people's lives, that's all that matters. For me, every time one person downloads my podcast, I say a blessing.
That's great.
And it was one person buys my book.
With different in comedy, they say if you make one person laugh, you suck. You're supposed to try to make hundreds of people laugh.
Well, I have a podcast, 10 Minutes to Less Suffering. And
10 Minutes to Less Suffering.
Right, because I believe that if I can give people one little idea that alleviates some of their suffering during the day, then it's a win. Because anytime you can be more present, be more grateful, feel this internal freedom, you're going to be enjoying life. Because ultimately, we think it's about achieving, but it's really about presence, sharing, community, like we spoke about before. So this podcast, in 10 minutes, there's an idea that I try to express and share, and hopefully, I give an exercise if I can to help people live
Exercise if I can?
Well, if there's time. Sometimes I'll, tell a story.
It's funny, because I thought that was the name of the exercise. We do the exercise if I can. Well, if you can, speaking of if I can, we're going to bring out some really delicious food.
That's the only
now.
reason I'm here.
Yes, I understand. So in this crazy, stressed world, in a fear-based world that we live in, that we've lived forever, what are we going to do to help people not live in stress every day?
Yeah. Well, and that's the problem, because there's a lot of reasons to be stressed today. Right? You look about our government, you look what's going on in the world. I mean, I just watched this documentary about, what's it called? The Great Hack?
The Great Hack was an amazing documentary.
Yeah, and you watch that and you're like, I give up. But what we don't realize, though, is that that attitude is part of the problem. And I think it was Wayne Dyer who said, you can't feel bad enough to make the world better. You
Yeah.
can't feel sick enough. You can't feel
that's
stressed
nice.
enough, right?
Yeah.
So how do we do that? How do we know that if we hold the light, we know that if we stay open, we'll have the strength. All the people I know that are great people, they're tired, they're fatigued because they've let the world get to them. So what we need to do is we need to have a strong inner world. And that comes from presence. That's one of the most important things that we can do. If you could stay purely present, you will have the strength and energy to do what, do what you want. There's a great story Mark Nepo writes in his book, The Great Awakening, it's called. And he tells a story about a friend who was painting a room in his house red. And he got all this red paint, and he got the brushes, and his hands were totally full. And he tried to enter his house, and he didn't want to put anything down. And as he tried, and he struggled, he fell back, and he got red paint all over him. And he talks about how we don't want to put things down to enter the moment new. And that's the most important thing that we can do, especially with everything going on in the world. We have to be able to put it down and say, I know that's going on, but what is happening in this moment? And when we do that, when we put it down and we enter, life changes. So it's about presence. And also when you live in the blessing, like, what do I have? What's good? It's always a platform. And this idea of maybe reminds you, we don't know. We could go back in history and tell all these stories where we thought we were doomed, things couldn't get better. But life has maybe. If there's breath, there's hope. If there's hope, there's maybe. And maybe things will get better. But people who care need to stay strong.
I got it. All right, we're going to take a little break. We're going to bring out some food and want to talk to you about some of the clients you're working with nowadays. Okay? So we're back, and it seems like it was really quick in between, but we went home, we took showers, and we all feel better now, and we're back for the food, and we have again, yes. Well, that's one of the beauties of this video podcast is we get to get food, and we get to meet our friend Belinda, who works there. Well, the Organic Grill, and Vlad would like to hear, he didn't tell me to say this, but it's a place where everyone comes from all different walks of life and they're a group of compassionate people who care about life and food and animals and the world. And it's a really, and I know you want to cut it off, but one of the great parts about it is the kind of food, the kind of health. We're nurturing ourselves by eating this kind of food. So what do we have here? This is one of my favorites.
First of all, it's very hard.
Yeah, so put your face right in it.
All right, this is what we call loaded fries, and it's made with our own house-made cheese. It smells wonderful. It has potatoes, tempeh bacon, mushrooms, and I'm salivating. Yeah, I love this dish.
He talks about it when we're not here. He's like, "Oh, did you have the loaded fries? Did you go in today?" It's
he
weird.
He secretly wants to be on this
he wants
podcast so
marry,
he can eat.
He wants
so
to
he can
marry
eat it.
this.
All right, let
this
me
potatoes.
give you plates.
All right, this is amazing stuff. And growing up, I didn't like sweet potatoes. It was kind of weird, but now I love them.
You don't have to eat it. Don't worry about it.
No,
Just
now I've grown up. I'm good.
We can handle it.
No,
handle it.
please. Please, mister. I want that. How has food worked in your life?
All right, this is our Belinda.
Yes. Well, we'll get back to that, Belinda.
All right, this is our shepherd pie made with lentil. Amazing, amazing dish. This is our, pancakes. Pancakes with bananas and what else? Let me just
heaven
check.
and I think bananas and apples.
Right.
And
this
Belinda,
is our apple crisp, my favorite. I'm not a big fan of desserts, but fruits, oh my God, this is. I would just eat this.
I just want to
not
say
that I eat only this.
Yes.
As you can see.
Another thing about the staff, we have Izzy and Emily and Belinda, and the people here work are amazing.
I don't even know if we can pronounce Emily's name.
Yeah, she gets really nervous. She doesn't like, but it's a different Emily than the one that she thinks it is.
Yeah.
So how is food in your life? How has that changed or made things better or different, or has it not?
Oh, food has made a tremendous difference in my life. In fact, I was becoming very ill when I was in my teens. And by the time that I got to law school, I had so many problems. I didn't even think I was going to be able. I got that job at that large law firm, and I wondered, how am I going to do this?
Did you think it came from stress, the illness?
I think that I think that I had a lot of allergies growing up, but I think my anxiety, together with the immune system and nervous system, probably that wasn't really strong enough. Mm-hmm. I probably was just an empath and just feeling the world, but I didn't know how to relate to it. So when I got that job, I was like, how am I going to do this? And my sister told me about this diet called macrobiotics.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, yes, I had this
That's how
job.
this restaurant started.
And I found this woman who delivered meals. So you can imagine, like 25 years ago, being at like a white shoe, huge law firm, and like I was eating seaweed and daikon, and so I was trying to be funny about it, but just eating macrobiotics and working all the time, being stressed, about 60 to 70% of my problems went away. And the other 30% has been a lifelong issue.
Yeah.
But food really,
Integrative School of Nutrition started as a
they started as a macrobiotic center.
which I never knew.
Yeah. And
before I met you.
Yeah, and over the years I've changed things, but healthy eating and farm to table and no additives, preservatives, hormones. I mean, we have to do the best we could do for our bodies. The cleaner our bodies are, the more it's going to flow, the clearer our mind's going to be, and we're going to have more of a shot of pursuing the things we want in this world. So
And
eating is a big thing.
And how does food work with stress?
Well, I used to stress eat.
Right. Emotional eating.
Oh,
Yeah,
how
emotional
unusual,
eating.
huh?
Yeah, and also too, people don't have to remember to chew, and
Right.
digest well. I mean, you think about it, part of digestive problems are not digesting life. So for me, I'm able actually to eat food easier when I'm less stressed. So when I'm more present, so I'm more likely to digest a meal well. So I think
Okay,
everything is related.
Well, dig in a little bit. I want to ask
Let's
Vlad.
digest.
I want to ask Vlad a question. When people come into the restaurant and they're eating this kind of food, do some people change their opinion on this kind of food?
It's really like I have stories for days. I had yesterday one lady who came in and she's like, I never tried vegan food, and she talked about vegan food like it's something completely unusual that nobody ever heard of, and now she tried it. When in fact it's something that we have in our regular life, like vegetables and stuff. But
Right,
people
right.
portrayed it. It's like a foreign object that you never was in touch to. You never saw potatoes. You never saw broccoli. You never saw cauliflower. So, but I changed over the years my opinion, and I always tell people, don't preach. Just bring people over. We'll have food. We'll have conversation. Let's just have a good time. I truly believe there is no thing as such a thing as a vegan food. There is good food and bad food. Okay.
That's a really great
We have this. We love it or we don't love it. You don't have to be gourmand. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to like certain thing or don't like certain thing. If you don't like this particular dish, maybe you can try something else. But we just do it with love. We do it with quality and care, and people seem to like it.
Yeah, and it's a good spot. There's just a good energy in this place. All right, so what I was saying before the break was now you're working with all different clients from one end of the spectrum to the other, to the millionaires to people on the street. What's that like for you, and how did that change? How did that come about?
I always say maybe.
Ah.
That's really, and that's actually how the book came to be as well. I just stay in this place where I'm just open. And I know that when someone comes to me, that if I could serve in any way, that's the way I try to look at it. And nowadays, though, I do see I'm more honest with myself, who I connect with and who I don't connect with. So although I'm still very open in who I'll work with, I prefer at this point to feel connected. If I'm not going to be writing or doing my podcast, if I'm working with a client, I want to feel like I'm pushing the world forward in some way, even in the background. That's what's so great about life, that we don't realize we don't always have to be front and center, and that's why, we could all be part of it. We all need to be part of it. So for me, when I can get behind a company that, like Integrative, that was such a great experience for me to be part.
So it's for me. We
Yeah.
were doing. We just learned that we're working with the same company for so many years. We were doing catering for Integrative School of Nutrition for many years for the employees. We would just bring food. That's incredible company.
Yeah, it's like the first company though I've ever worked at where like there were bananas and mangoes and and you sit there and you're like,
bring organic vegan
Yeah.
food for them.
yeah,
And when
stuff
we-
my bag before I go home.
When we started
Yeah.
to deal with them, we even told them we want to do Vegan Tuesday, and that's what they did. Incredible, very receptive.
Yeah.
So tell us about, Brad and I were talking earlier about how you help all different kinds of people from one end of the spectrum to the other. And there was a famous story that you've talked about before about a homeless person that you had helped, and that person actually taught you a bunch.
Yeah, that was it was many years ago, and there was a fellow that used to he was homeless and he used to live on 8th Street by my house, and I would stop and I would say hello, and I was practicing this maybe mindset so much that I walked by him one day and I was like, maybe I could help him, and I started to talk to him. He's a lovely guy, really smart, and I said, what do you do for a living? And he said that he was an artist. So I was like, oh, maybe I could help you sell your paintings, and people might look, oh, why would you? You never know in life.
You never know.
But the strange thing about my relationship with Robert is that he would never bring any of his artwork, but he would always show up. It was a very, I always thought to myself, how does this homeless fellow know, it's Monday, it's 2:00, but Monday at 2:00 we would meet on 8th Street. And every week he would say, oh, I don't have my artwork today. My brushes got stolen, or the weather ruined my paintings.
But he didn't hide from you.
He didn't hide. He showed up, and the story continued. So, and a lot of people were like, why are you doing this? It's never going to, nothing's ever going to change. So then one day I thought to myself, oh, well, maybe he used to do something else, because this art thing is not really working out for the two of us.
Yeah.
And so then he told me he was an office manager. So what made me think a homeless person would have a resume? But he said, I could bring him my resume. Yeah. So again, this continued, and every week there, like the dog ate my homework. It was the same kind of thing. But I would show up and I would be hopeful. And it's funny looking back, I think back then I was hopeful that he would actually show up with the resume. Today I think I would just want to show up and see what was possible. But back then, even though I was in maybe, I think I was still like, I'm going to help this guy. I'm going to do it. Maybe he taught me that. Maybe he's one of the reasons I shifted. And then I just eventually gave up. Because I realized this wasn't happening. And I spoke to one of my friends who was an advocate for homeless people. And she told me that, he really could get a place to live. So things weren't really adding up. And then one day I was in my car, which I do still have a car in New York City.
We were talking about that earlier.
And I saw Robert. And I stopped and I gave him money. I only gave him money when I was driving. For some reason, when I was walking, we spoke, we hung out. But when I drove, because I used to drive my kids to school because the suburban woman in me never fully left, I would give him money. And I stopped and he said to me, oh, I was walking to get a cup of coffee and I thought maybe someone would give me $1. And when he used the word maybe, I realized like,
Don't even bring your
but
resume.
but I realized that I was, in a way that I was practicing maybe, but I was saying what he should want in his life. Mm-hmm. And I know we could say, well, he's homeless, but we don't know what people want. We shouldn't tell people what they should want in life. And all he wanted from me, I thought at the time, was money for coffee. And so I gave him the $1 and I thought, oh, I have found meaning in our relationship. And I didn't see him for months. And then I wasn't even on 8th Street. I ran into him, I think on like 13th and Broadway. I don't even remember. And I said, oh, Robert, I haven't seen you in a while. And he was in the hospital. He had pneumonia. And he looked at me. He said, you know something, Allison? He's like,
after you gave me this coffee.
Well, it was months later. He had gotten out of the hospital and he said, you know, Allison, people spit on me all day long. He goes, and those doctors made me feel like they cared about me, and you've always made me feel, I was bawling, crying. Right. He said, you always made me feel like you cared about me. And he said, and it always makes me think that maybe my life, I don't remember the exact words, maybe my life can get better. And again, he used that word. Yeah. And I looked at him and I'm like, you make me feel like maybe my life could get better too. And you know, it was a very profound moment to realize that you think you know what's going on between you and somebody else, but really it's just love exchanging. Like I thought I was helping him. I was just being human, and he was being human. And he was helping me, and I was helping him.
And your friend who's the advocacy for homeless people, she'll tell you different. You know, a lot of people, like even comedians, will make fun of the homeless, and there's nothing funny about being homeless. There's nothing funny. The funny thing is how people who are not homeless react to homeless people. Right. That's where the comedy, that's where the humor is in. Right. But the actual situation is different, where you know, people make fun of things because they're afraid. Like the bald, fat guy will go up on stage and make fun of himself for being fat or bald. It's, you know, in life, there's so much underneath the surface that's more important.
But we have to keep our hearts open, right? And it's the fear and the unknown, going back to that makes us close our hearts. And so for me, this little idea of maybe kept me in the relationship with him. And although I had all these ideas of what was going to happen, at least maybe helped me to keep showing up. And what's sad is that Robert ends up passing away, and I didn't know this. And I was walking on A Street again one day, and there was a homeless woman there. And it turns out she was his girlfriend. I didn't know that. And he had gotten housing, and she was now living in the housing.
That's wonderful.
So it was so amazing that he expressed the fact that he had hope now to get housing and stuff. And I'm sure that I don't think my relationship with him was what made him do it, but I think all the kindness that I think kindness gives people maybe.
So, how do you find that, we were talking about, food and our families and macrobiotics. How do you find that food works with stress?
Well, first of all, I think that we were talking about before that some of us use food to deal with our stress. And then we end up overeating. And we talked about, I think there's a big relationship between how we digest and stress. So for me, a practice of meditation or a Reiki practice or yoga or mindfulness, whatever you can do to alleviate that stress will help you with your relationship with food. But I also think what you eat, like we talked about before, also can make you feel better. It can make you feel lighter. If you're not eating fried foods all the time, if you're not eating a lot of dairy. I mean, everyone has, their own diet that works for them. But I think it does lend people to feel better. When you feel better, you're naturally going to be less stressed. So I think food is a big part.
Yeah, and the other thing is how can, there's someone out there who's watching, listening, and they're like, I'm stressed and I have all this anxiety and I feel alone. What would you say to them?
You can listen to my podcast.
Yes, and tell them about your podcast.
My podcast is 10 Minutes to Less Suffering, and you could find it on iTunes. And what's so nice about the podcast is that within 10 minutes, you could find an idea that will help you suffer less. And I could sometimes I talk about maybe, but I also talk about, that story about the red paint. I did an entire podcast on coming to the moment new. And also when people are mean to you, how do you react to that? I think.
And what would be one of the things you would do, or two of them?
Your help yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, I just actually saw Paul Selig. I don't know if you know who he is. He's this clairvoyant who says that these guides speak through him. And he said, what you damns you in return. And so we have to be very careful, right? Because like we talked about before, people are going to knock us around and we're going to have suffering and things are going to happen in life. But we have to be really careful to act in a way that always serves us. And that doesn't mean self-serving, because it could be it serves the world, but we have to find a space between stimulus and response. And that's really the key. That space is what's going to determine how you act. So for me, I'm always thinking about, when somebody says something to me, I always try to gain that space, whether through a breath. If I'm not with that person, maybe I'll do a practice of some sort. Maybe I'll do a maybe practice or a gratitude practice, whatever I will do to say, okay, I'm not going to get lost in this outer experience. And then I'm going to make sure my reaction serves me. And sometimes saying nothing serves us, right? Sometimes you have to say something, but without clarity of thought, the world will control us. And that's the problem. The person who said something to us, we're going to be damned if we don't take the time within ourselves to find that space to act in a different way. So to me, that space is the most important thing that we have in life.
That's wonderful. And how can people contact you? Is there a way to do that?
My website is AllisonCarmen.com. My email is Allison@AllisonCarmen.com. My book is The Gift of Maybe, and it's available at all major bookstores and on Amazon. And again, my podcast is 10 Minutes to Less Suffering, which is on iTunes and Spotify and all those places.
That's great. So let's eat and have some more shepherd pie and all that. And thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It was really great to be here today.